Before this video begins, I'd love to give a shout out to my first channel, SaberHalo. It was once called Dividable Plays, where I was supposed to upload gameplay years back. Anyways, I decided to bring it back where I wanted to upload game nights and raids and anything that I did with Sentinel or just any gameplay in general. So go ahead and subscribe to my second channel, SaberHalo, for more content. How's it going, guys? My name is DividableHalo HD. Today I am joined by SaberFear for another interview. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, ready for this interview.
Alright, sweet. So, if you guys don't know, I've interviewed SaberFear about probably 3 times in the past in the channel. Once talking about the Plague clan that he once had on Halo Reach, and then later on talking about Vast and the TCW war. So, it's been some time, hey?
Yeah, it's been a while. I've been, obviously, my trifecta of clans from the Plague to Vast and now Sentinel, which I'm sure we'll get into later in this video.
Yeah, exactly. So during the last interview, from what I could recall, we left off pretty much during midway through Vast, before the Exodus War, before really anything happened. So let's kind of kick off from there. What happened during the Exodus War? How did it start?
Yeah,
really?
so I mean, pretty much after the Commonwealth War ended with Vast, we kind of got into a series of smaller conflicts between clans like LRG and just some other not any notable clans. And during this time, it was kind of starting to prove that we were a military power at the time, because in the sphere of the community, it was pretty much like Exodus, 99th Regiment, Navcom, FS. Those were the major clans at the time, with maybe Remnant and Trident as some of the other notable clans. This is back when Exodus was pretty much at its peak, I would say, on Halo 5, and it was led by, at that time, I think Divine was still briefly around, but not too much. It was mostly Corey and Power and all them. So whenever, for those of you who might not have seen the other 2 interviews, just to kind of clear up some things, Plague, which was my first clan, actually ended up merging into Exodus. And then whenever I left Exodus, I created Vast. So I had left Exodus on good terms with a majority of the clan. The only person that I really had problems with was Power at the time. So I was very familiar with all the members of Exodus, because, like I said, we merged into them with the Plague, and I had just left the clan to start Vast with the group of people that we ended up doing it with, the UNE, with obviously you, DividableHalo, and UNE, the UPR with Justice Chaos, and the Ghosts of Reach, or Ghosts of Onyx, I think that's what they were called. It was with Vast Cataclysm or Wraith V1 and Tap My Glass and all of those guys. So it was just a combination of a lot of new guys, but ultimately it was from Exodus, so I had a good relationship with them. But whenever we started up Vast, we did a couple practice raids, and they quickly turned hostile, and what ended up happening was Power, being kind of in charge of foreign affairs at that time, decided to suspend activity from Vast. So basically he made the decision that they were no longer going to be raiding Vast, and that kind of was the beginning of bad relations between Exodus and Vast as clans, not necessarily people. I think it was pretty clear in the community chats at that time, because it was actually a kick in Facebook still, that there was a chance of conflict between between our clans. But obviously I didn't want to start anything with Exodus, because I had a lot of people, a lot of friends in there. So what ended up happening was I was actually approached by Shaky Joker, and we had a meeting to discuss, or he wanted to talk to me, and we wanted to discuss like kind of the internal affairs of Exodus at the time, and he was trying to basically find a way for Vast to help him out with a revolution that he was going to be starting with an Exodus to overthrow power. And it was using the hashtag Viva La Revolution, I believe it was at the time, and the turn off the power kind of propaganda that he had already created. It was him and a large majority of the Shakies, which, for those of you who don't know, the Shakies were a like core gamer tag group within Exodus, composed of a lot of the main and major members that like obviously Shaky Divine, Shaky Joker, Shaky Disciple. There's a lot of people in Exodus that had the Shaky gamer tags. So whenever I was approached by him and a number of the other Shakies at the time, I was like, all right, this is pretty legit, because from my perspective, it's like these are the OG members, these are the founding members of the clan, the people who I'm friends with, and they want to basically overthrow the only person that I genuinely had issues with within Exodus, and who I genuinely thought was trying to harm Exodus, or not necessarily harming, but he was just leading it in the wrong direction, right? Because Exodus was a clan, like an insurrectionist superpower, for however long it was up, and he was leading it in a way of like political correctness and peace, instead of like war domination like it used to be on Reach. And I and a lot of the people in Exodus didn't really like that. So I was talking with Joker about doing this, and I talked to a couple of the people that were in leadership at the time with Vast, and we decided that we would help him out. Now, before we ended up doing this, I was actually had a meeting with Shaky Joker, and I don't remember if Shaky Joker set up the meeting or if he was actually there, but I remember it was a meeting between basically Vast and the Commandos. So Wagner was the commissioner of the Commandos at the time. Wagner came, he was basically saying, you know, he's down with the whole plan because the Commandos, which were the special forces of Exodus at the time, they were unhappy with how power was taking the direction of the clan also, and then they would be also down to overthrow power and then restore the leadership to somebody that like actually was a true member of Exodus. So the plan was Vast declares war in Exodus, the revolution starts, there's a military coup, we throw out power, power is replaced, now Vast is no longer at war with Exodus, and you know the plan goes out, you know, perfectly, right? That's ideally what is supposed to happen. Is supposed to everything just goes down right. But nope, that's not at all what happened. What ended up happening was whenever Vast declared war, we were double crossed by both the Commandos and the Shakies. And the true reason that they wanted us to declare war was just so that they can get activity and make things interesting. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time because I trusted the Shakies, I trusted the Commandos, and I was genuinely declaring war, and we were genuinely trying to help out and remove power from his position. So that kind of turned into a whole mess, because now all of a sudden our entire reason for going to war with Exodus was almost invalid, and Power, being like a political genius that he is, already had a response that he made before the war declaration, because he already knew about it, because it was planned out. The entire thing was planned out of them baiting us into this conflict. So once we got baited into the conflict, it was like we fell right into the trap of the Exodus, and we were like hated throughout the community. Vast was hated by like all of the powers, and what happened was all of them decided to declare war on us. So Navcom declared war, 99th Regiment and FS declared war, UGN at the time, which was another one of the big powers, declared war. So every other power in the community declared war besides our allies, which were Remnant, or I think it might have been Synoviet at the time, and Triton. They were cool with us. So hold up.
All right. So ultimately, where did this war like take you? Did it was it like something that damaged Vass's reputation?
Um, Political reputation, especially at the time, yes. It's pretty. So I would say, I would say in the long term, it kind of made us, in a way, the villains of the community. And throughout the entire war, I think this is kind of, I think this war really set the atmosphere for the rest of Halo 5 in a bad way. And I'm about to kind of get into the actual conflict in just a second. But the reason why I say that is because this war kind of popularized political correctness and politics over actual military action and dominance and skill and victory on the battlefield, because beforehand it mattered more about who was actually winning the war, who was actually winning in battle. But in this war specifically, Vast was dominant in combat. We actually finished the war 10-1 against all of the other major powers, with the only loss of the war being the first loss against Exodus, in which we were attacking them. So that was the only actual loss that we experienced throughout the entire war, and yet we kind of like lost the war in a sense of politics, because Power was so smart in ROE debates, in community discussions. He had the community support, and whenever people say the victors write history, it's pretty true, because you could consider Exodus the victors of that war just because they, even though the war was ended technically by a peace treaty and that no side actually won or lost, a lot of people view Exodus as the victors of the wars because they had the side of the community. You know, obviously all the other major powers supported them, and they just had the community back, the backing of the entire community. So even though we were dominating them in every single battle, we beat Navcom so bad, in fact, that they refused to continue doing raids with us. We didn't even get a raid with UGN because there was like an ROE dispute, and then they were like, we're not going to raid you if you don't give us this certain ROE or this rule or whatever. And we're like, okay, you know, whatever. You guys don't want to raid us, that's fine. You're the one that declared war. And then FS just got blown out of the water. That they're the one that ran up the score, honestly. I think it was something like 4 or 5-1 against Exodus specifically, but the rest of the wins came against FS and 99th Regiment because we just continued to raid them, and they just got blown out of the water every single time. But yeah, that's kind of like back to my point of the atmosphere. I just think that it really set the tone for the rest of Halo 5, and honestly the clan community in a terrible way, because Power, given his position in Exodus, was able to influence the community and how wars played out in the future. And I think that is the root of the downfall of the community, in my personal opinion, in terms of like I guess you could say ideology. So yeah, I mean, do you want me to go into this more specifics on the war, or?
I believe that pretty much kind of answers it. It wasn't that very long ago that we were dealing with it, but ultimately, it kind of, like I said, like as you pretty much stated, it led to more or less a downfall in how the community looked afterwards. Because even like around then, Halo 5 stopped doing updates, and people started becoming inactive towards the very end of that war as well. So, do you mind more or less going into what happened after the war? Like, I believe there was a war with DA that was supposed to occur but did not happen.
So, actually, funny thing is, after the war happened, we became peaceful. And one of the big reasons why we decided to actually end the war on Vast's side is because of actual IRL reasons. During Vast, I was like extremely active, to the point where I was unintentionally kind of like backpacking the clan in terms of activity, and leadership, because I was just a super micromanagey leader at the time. Like I wanted to do everything, and I didn't really put as much trust as I should have in other people to do things. So I did everything myself, and looking back on it, obviously that was a negative thing to build a clan upon, but it was how it was, and I ended up actually just not being able to do clans as much as I could anymore. And a lot of the other leadership at the time was also experiencing some IRL stuff, because I think this was around the time that school was starting back up again. So a lot of people had to go back to school and whatnot with jobs. So we decided to take a little bit of a break from clans, and Vast was still technically a clan because we still were a group and none of us joined other clans, but we kind of like took a break after the war was concluded, and that was one of the reasons why we concluded the war, is because we needed to take a break. So we concluded that war, took a break, and then when we came back we kind of rebranded it as like Vast Gen 2, which was essentially the same people but with an additional, with like more, because with more people added onto it, because at the time at the first generation of Vast, I would say it was a very like small, maybe 40 person like tight knit group of people who like had really great chemistry, worked very well together. It was a very well oiled machine, probably the best like collection of people that I can think of at that time, competitively and in raids, and it was proven during that war. But actually, before we even get into the DA thing, something that's funny that I'd like to point out is after we ended that Exodus war, the Commandos and the Shakies ended up leaving Exodus and starting up a rebellion against Exodus because of power. And they created a clan called Blood and Iron, which is essentially like the collection of the Commandos and the original Shakies. And this was basically in rebellion to power, which is exactly the same reason why we declared war on Exodus in the first place. So really their intentions were actually there the entire time. They just double crossed us, and it ended up biting them in the ass, because whenever they did this EIA revolution or whatever, it completely failed and they got absolutely curb stomped by Exodus. And it kind of triggers me to this day to think that they double crossed this and then ended up still doing the same thing right after the conflict. But yeah, going on to like the whole Divine Angels conflict, around Gen 2 we were just starting up, and we were kind of like starting to become like hostile with the Divine Angels. So we ended up inviting them to have a meeting on one of our maps, and the meeting was to quote unquote fix relations because of the hostility. And then the meeting, obviously, if you've seen any of the media, turned into a complete like red wedding scenario where we completely like slaughtered all of the Divine Angels members and started the war off. And that was pretty much the beginning of that Divine Angels kind of short conflict. It ended up being resolved by Clan Orta and the NRI whenever we were having a meeting to kind of, because at the time this was when the military establishment, or it was the foundation and the establishment whole thing was going on, where the clan community was very much separated between the establishment clans and the foundation being Orta, NRI, DA, and THL and all those clans. And then the establishment being Exodus and Synoviet. And I think at this time Orion Initiative and Trident were about to become a thing, or were a thing. So those clans were considered in the establishment. So we ended up resolving that war peacefully, and then Vast kind of went into another hibernation thing where we were pretty inactive, but we were still around, so we still kind of did stuff. And then we went into Generation 3, actually, where at this time I was like, I'm not going to be active, so I knew I didn't want to completely reboot the clan and like go all out, because I wasn't going to be able to, because at the time I had a girlfriend and I was really busy with my social life, so I was spending most of my time with her or doing other things. So um, the leaders of Vast came to me and they're like, hey, we can lead the clan for you, you don't have to do much. So I was like, okay, you guys can start it up. So we started it up and we rebooted it, and then it didn't work out as we all anticipated, unfortunately. Once again, mostly because of IRL circumstances and the actual leaders not being able to be online as much as they had originally anticipated. You know, shit happens. Whatever. So after that, whenever Vast pretty much went, like after that third generation, we ended officially. Like, and then I went into like a very long time of like not being around in the community. This is around when Trident was dominant. I was like not around at all, like in 2017, I would say.
Okay. So
yeah,
no. So during that time, I believe like I was inactive too, as being one of the leaders within Vast as well. But there were a few clans that I knew that you joined. One being the UGN, one being I believe it's the Colonial Federation, if I could
Terran
recall.
Federation.
Yeah, the Terran Federation.
Terran Federation.
So, do you want to kind of tell us what went on after Vast, like when you eventually did reside back into the community?
Yeah, so whenever I ended up, like, whenever I was no longer committed to Vast, we kind of, well, at the end of Generation 3, we actually merged into our closest ally, which was Remnant at the time, and some of the Vast members are actually still with them today, like Tap My Glass and Wraith. But I was with Remnant for a while, and then I ended up joining UGN, and that was like the last generation of the United Golden Nation. And then I was just not active enough, and I think they ended up ending. So whenever I came back, like, because I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend, so I obviously had a lot more time on my hands. I was like, you know what, maybe I'll come back into clans. This was actually around the beginning of 2018. By January time, I came back and I realized that Shadow Sniper and JB had created a clan called the Terran Federation, and I was like, the thing is, after leading Vast, I pretty much looked around the community and I didn't see any leaders that I would actually be willing to follow. Like, I didn't view any leader as capable and experienced, or more experienced than I would be, and I'm a big person about leadership, and I'm not going to join a clan if I don't respect, or I feel like I would be more experienced or knowledgeable than the actual leadership itself, which is kind of like why I joined the Terran Federation, because you have Shadow Sniper and JB, who were historic figures of the community. They were the only people that I could potentially learn something from, because they were kind of before my time of leadership, so I felt like I could actually benefit from joining the Terran Federation to kind of learn from Shadow Sniper specifically. So I joined the Terran Federation as a regular member, and actually the second day that I was in the clan, they held an emergency meeting because one of the small clan was created to destroy the Terran Federation, and it was like an emergency meeting, and I was appointed as like a non-commissioned officer right then and there in time of like crisis or whatever. And then that's when I began leadership in the Terran Federation and went through the leadership program through Shadow Sniper, and I eventually went on to lead the Special Forces of Terran Federation, which at that time I actually went and recruited the entire Special Forces of Sentinel, Sentinel, Task Force Sentinel, which was the Special Forces unit of Vast. So everybody that was in Special Forces of Vast ended up joining the Terran Federation, and it was kind of like a mini, like, Vast squad within the Terran Federation. It was actually a really solid clan for a while. Um, Till I ended up deciding to leave, which, you want me to just go right into that?
No. So what we're gonna do before we get into the era of Sentinel, because we're nearing that point, is we're gonna kind of just recap anything that you want to say about Vast or any of these clans that you're in before. So
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of, yeah, like going back into Vast specifically, I would say in terms of like our military dominance, just to kind of like emphasize on this because we're about to go into Sentinel with another interview. Basically, Vast. So on the first raid of the war, we were attacking Exodus, and funny enough, we actually took over the base from Exodus with I think around 20 to 30 minutes left. And one of our members, Party VG or Cody, he was sniping in the raid and he was actually streaming, and he ended up being a little too cocky and was killed, and then the sniper fell out of the base. So luckily we were able to handle that situation, but that just led to a huge chain of events where we ended up losing the base because Exodus put a secret entrance within the base in order to get around into the armory that we didn't know about. So they were able to use these like gears and moving like pistons to guide them up into the armory, because we were controlling choke points within the map. And the reason why we were controlling choke points is because I was actually getting yelled at in the middle of the raid to go run, because at this point I was like running, I had to run like 2 miles a day, right? So I was like, I hadn't run my 2 miles yet, and my dad came in, he's like, get your ass off Xbox, you gotta go run those 2 miles right now. So I was like, oh shit. I was like, please just let me finish this raid, this is like really important, right? So I ended up going to hide somewhere in the back of the base. So we were pretty much like 7 versus 8 at that point, and that was pretty crazy because obviously these are like the 2 premier clans at the time, Vast and Exodus, and like the first raid of the conflict, which is the most important raid. So I was gone, and then we ended up losing the base. So that's why we ended up losing that raid, is because I had to leave and because of the whole streaming incident, which I'm sure you probably already know about through the videos. But we were down 0-1, right, to Exodus, Vast was. And we were like, all right, we need to come back strong. We need to get another victory as soon as possible, because this was honestly the first time at this point I was leading clans for probably 2 years straight. This was the first time that I had ever been trailing in a war. So I was like, all right, we got to push the momentum back to our side. So we decided to surprise raid Exodus less than a few hours after that raid. They were actually doing a raid with a group of trolls that were known as the dungeon at the time. So it was like Needle, Irioka, like Finity, like a whole bunch of these like really notorious like dungeon slanging, like I think Bound was there too. They were defending this ridiculously OP map from Exodus, and we just joined in. So this started the first surprise raid of the war, where we were attacking Exodus and the trolls. The trolls ended up backing out, and then eventually it was just maybe 1 random or 2 randoms versus a whole group of Exodus members and a whole group of Vast members. I think it was around equal. I think we probably had like 8 people, then Exodus had like 7, and then there was like 1 random or something like that. We ended up controlling the base, and if you know anything about Halo 5 surprise raids, they end after 6 hours because the servers crash, the dedicated servers crash. So we were like, all right, we just gotta hold this for 6 hours, right? So at this time, it was only Exodus against Vast. There were no other clans that had declared war on us. It was just us. It was just a 1v1 conflict. So I get a message in the middle of this raid, which by the way started at probably 11 o'clock Central Time at night, so probably like midnight Eastern Time. I get a message from FS Malevolent. At the time, he was the leader of Forgotten Soldiers, and he was like, hey, we've been thinking about it, and we are going to enter the conflict against Exodus on your side. which was big because FS was friendly with us, but also friendly with Exodus, and they were kind of undecided at the time. And they were like, so what we're gonna do is we're going to set up with the 99th Regiment, because the 99th Regiment is also going to help out, and we're going to invite Exodus to our game and bait them into a surprise raid. So I was like, okay, bet, because this was huge, because it was like FS and 99th are going to help us out, which were two of Exodus's biggest allies. You know, this is going to be an amazing like turn of the tides, right? So FS and 99th are on this map. They invite Exodus to the game, and they're spawn killing Exodus. So he sends me videos of him spawn killing Exodus, and in the community chats, it's going crazy because FS and 99 just got involved in this war. You know, FS is sending me these screenshots of him basically declaring war on Exodus, and his conversations between him and Power, and him and Corey, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, this is legit. And then later in the surprise raid, Malevolent's like, hey, we don't have enough members. Could you send us some? I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. So we have like a whole bunch of members that are on queue, because with Halo 5 you can have up to 8 people in queue. So we have queue completely fill at this point with another 8 people on in like fighting in the raid against Exodus. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, we can spare some people. So luckily I was like a little suspicious of this, and I knew we were going to control the base of this other raid because I was there, I was leading it, and the base was pretty OP anyways. So I was like, okay, we can spare some people. So I sent basically our 4v4 team, which was like Cody, Zilla, or Gojira, Tragic, and Nade. And I was like, all right, these are our 4 best people. We're going to send them in to help you. So we sent them in. They got into the lobby. What ended up happening was it was a complete bait. Like 99th and FS convinced us to basically fall into a trap. And our 4 members were up against 12 of 99th, FS, and Exodus in a surprise raid, which was literally a spawn, like almost a spawn kill map. Like for a majority of the time, our members were getting spawn killed. So we had 2 surprise raids going on at one time. So I diverted our forces, and I was like tagging everybody, because at the time we had banned. Not any other clan in the history of the clan community used banned except for Vast, but that's just goes to show you what kind of clan we were. We were innovative. So we were using ban, and I was like, everybody get on. I know it's like, because at this point it was like 3 a.m. in the morning. It was 3 hours into the raid. We had like nobody on. But luckily we had some Australian members. Shout out to Domertrons out there. And we had our Australians come in to refill the lobby. So we had 2 surprise raids going on against 3 of the major powers in the clan community, including Exodus, which was probably the biggest, right? What ended up happening was, I think we got like 1 extra guy into the other game, so it was a 5v11. We ended up taking over the base, despite being outnumbered 11-5. We took over the base, and we ended up spawn killing them, and we won both of the surprise raids. So this was like huge, like monumental. Like in modern day community, if something like this had happened, then it would have been like, you know, game changing. Like obviously Exodus and 99th and FS would have been getting shit on, but what ended up happening was Exodus turned it into like I was saying, a political game where they were like, oh well, we're not going to count surprise rates till the war score. So what ended up happening was Exodus was like, all right, we're not going to count these, and then the entire community was like, yeah, surprise rates are stupid, so we're gonna get rid of them. And that was kind of like I was hinting at earlier, why a big reason why the community is so bad nowadays is because a lot of the old like cultural like ideology was lost, because a new policy that Exodus and Power implemented, and the new clans and the new clan kids were super politically correct and super politically motivated, and ended up taking away from the military aspect of clans. So that's just kind of like a little tidbit of information, I know, at the end. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Vast, unless you had any other questions.
No, that pretty much covers it. I mean, during the time of Halo 5, like you said, like we had about 5-hour, 6-hour time limits, right? Discord wasn't a thing. It was more or less banned, and a lot of other websites that we would be using to pretty much run the clan. But it was good times, and I was very proud to be a member within it. Anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to actually cut this interview into 2 parts. The first part is going to be about Vast, along with everything that was going on, and the second part will be pretty much about Sentinel, as this interview is getting pretty long. So anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. SaberFear will be here once again for the second part of the video, which will hopefully be uploaded within a timely manner, depending on editing. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Goodbye.